Can you hear me well? Okay, then 1 out of 3 microphone works so far. Good morning, and thank you very much for coming to this event, to this symposium, to honor Fray Angélico Chávez. Fray Angélico Chávez, who passed away in 1996, would have celebrated his 100th birthday today. My name is Tomas Jaehn, and I have the honor to have worked for 10 years or more, 10 years, so in the library that bears his name. In the library, we have all his books, 22, 23 books, all signed, first editions. We have all his poetry. We also have in the manuscript collections his writings, some of his writings, and we also have correspondence in those collections. Just to give you an idea of who wrote to Angélico, Fray Angélico had correspondence with Paul Horgan, 2 times Pulitzer Prize winner. He received 1 or 2 letters from Jackie Kennedy Onassis. And my personal favorite is 2 letters from T.S. Eliot, one of the most important 20th century poets. As you probably know, today we want to hear a little bit about his influence, his impact on New Mexico and on New Mexico culture. And he does that, or he did influence, because he had so many hats that he wore. And I'm sure we can identify with one or the other of those hats. We have writers here probably, poets, priests. We have people with military career here. And for me personally, because I identify with this, he also was an archivist. And that's half of my job. He simply is important for New Mexico history. And as the New York Times obit says, he was the chronicler of New Mexico history. What I'm trying to hope that we get away with tonight or late this afternoon is not only to get a better understanding of the person, of the man, but also to understand what it means to be a New Mexican, to have grown up in New Mexico. This is sort of what I'm hoping we might get away with. I just have to do a few logistics. One of them is your handout has on the back page a questionnaire that I would like you to fill out at some point before you leave. If you do want to keep that as a souvenir, we also have the survey online on our website. You just click and you have 5 questions, the same ones as here. And I really would like you to give us some feedback. The symposium is set up that I basically have 5 minutes after each talk for 1 or 2 questions. I would like you to hold off with questions if you can until 3:30 after the break, where we have then an hour of questions and testimonials. With testimonials, I mean, I would like you, the audience, to tell us, the audience, if you have a story, if you have a encounter with Fray Angélico that you would like to share with us. So often people come to my library. My library. It's your library, but it's my library and my books. I stole that phrase from the archivist from the Library of Congress who says, my Gutenberg Bible. But anyway, so many times people come to the library and tell me, I've met Fray Angélico. By the time I think I better write this down, the phone rings, the next patron comes, something happens, I do not write it down, and I wished I had. So I'm hoping that we have some stories today that enlighten us a little bit about Fray Angélico's life. If some of you do not want to ask a question or tell a story, the volunteers have cards that you can write down your story or your question, and I will then read it after this afternoon. Also, we have books out there. If you want to purchase one, the gentleman will be here at lunch again and at the break in the afternoon. If you do want a book in between, the gift shops also sell them. Before we get started, I would like to thank my colleagues in graphics department who did a marvelous job with the poster, the PR people who gave us good exposure in the Pasatiempo and other magazines. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Nick up there, who is video recording, Trisha Hewitt, my colleague, and and especially also our volunteers who you can ask for directions for where to go to lunch and so on and so forth. They helped a lot. I could not have done it without them. I also want to thank Mario Garcia, who is really an expert on Fray Angélico himself, who is the evaluator for today. And I want to thank Tom Leach. Tom Leach is the curator for the Palace Press. He designed and printed and created that marvelous poem that you all, I hope, got a copy of. There were 225 copies were made of this poem. The typeface is a Bodoni condensed, which he chose because it was crisp and legible, and also because the first typefaces, I need to get out the camera, because the first typefaces used in New Mexico on Padre Martinez's press belonged to that family of typefaces. The paper is a custom-made lamination of 2 sheets of Hahnemüller, I can't pronounce that word, Hahnemühle paper from a German mill founded in 1584. Tom made the linoleum cut and used it for the sun design on the print. Tom, are you here? Last row is Tom. Thank you. I also would like to thank the Center for Southwest and Mike Kelly for their financial support. And this program could not have been done without the New Mexico Humanities Council. I would like to thank Craig Newbill and his staff and any board members that might be here of the Humanities Council of this program. Last but not least, I'd like to thank Dr. Levine for letting us use the museum and this marvelous auditorium, just meant for events like this. And I would like to introduce Dr. Levine to say a few words and also to introduce Archbishop Michael Sheehan.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for choosing to spend all or part of today with us here at the History Museum. I know a couple of you have been here at programs last week and during this week, and I joked with some that they just went home long enough to change their clothes and come back. And I think we've been open almost a year. We've been occupying the building for a year. It was open to the public on May 23rd, and since that time, we've had about 137,000 visitors. Thank you. And many of them have come to programs like this. I'm going to add a little bit to Tomas's logistics. One is, you know those things you have in your purse and your pocket? Let's turn them off. When I turn them off, I mean, it's like should be declared a holiday because I'm wired to this thing. But please turn off your cell phones so that we can hear all the speakers. The other logistic is restrooms. The closest ones are if you go out this exit, if you're in the forward half of the auditorium, if you go out this exit and take a left, you can go in and out those doors, and the restrooms are sort of around to the, just keep turning left as many times as you can. And if you're up in the back, you go out those doors and then down the staircase and around to your right, as many right turns as you can make until you reach it. I think that takes care of logistics. Of course, should we have a fire drill, and some of you who've been here to programs know that that has happened, If you are in the front, again, you can go down this exit and then up the stairs out, or you can go out the back and up the stairs. But our wonderful guards, Esteban, is with us in the back and in the front. And is that Pete? That's Pete Richards is in the back. So our guards will escort you out. And please stay calm. Do what they tell you to do. They've kept me safe in all kinds of situations. So enjoy, and please enjoy the entire museum today. If you've not taken the chance to see it, please do. Tomorrow is the last day for our exhibit, Fashioning New Mexico. The fashion exhibit on the uppermost floor, which in the elevator is called 2. This floor is called LL if you're in the front half of the auditorium, and M if you're in the back. So far, nobody has been permanently lost in this museum, but it is a hard building. But all of you seem to be enjoying it. And Tomas, stop pacing. It's going to be fine. It's okay, Tomas. He's doing great. This is a fabulous day and a fabulous opportunity for us to honor Fray Angélico Chávez, to honor the unbelievable body of historical research. And Tom, I hope you've almost filled his shoes, but not quite. But not quite. What a distinguished family history, and we're so pleased to be joined today by the Chavez family and my personal favorite, Fabian. Thank you for being here. I have the honor to introduce our Archbishop, Michael Sheehan, to you, and I'm sure he needs no introduction, but I have a few comments. He was born to our east, and he was born in Wichita, Kansas. Spent much of his career practicing in Texas, where I spent some time as well, although at Southern Methodist University. Slightly different house. But Archbishop Sheehan was ordained a priest in Rome in July of 1964 and assigned to the Diocese of Dallas-Fort Worth, where I spent quite a bit of time in Dallas-Fort Worth. He has served various Catholic parishes in Texas and Tyler. He served a variety of positions in the different dioceses in Texas, and in 1983, in 1983, he was appointed the founding bishop by Pope John Paul II, and I'm sure that was an enormous honor for you and your family. In Lubbock. What did I say? I didn't say in Lubbock, Texas. Sorry. And then he became what he called the rent-a-bishop. And he joked himself that it was because there was a 1-hour Southwest airline flight between Albuquerque and Lubbock that he became the rent-a-bishop for New Mexico. But in the summer of 1993, he became our 11th Archbishop in Santa Fe, also part of a distinguished line of archbishops who have served us. Please join me in welcoming Archbishop Michael Sheehan.
Thank you, Fran. I'm very happy to be here today and greet all of you. And as Fran mentioned, I haven't been here that long, 17 years. This year will be my 17th year. And, of course, the Chavez family, 400 years. And many of you come from families, backgrounds that go back hundreds of years, if not the whole 400 of our presence here in the city of Santa Fe. And so my genealogy, my New Mexico genealogy isn't quite like Fabian and Tomas, but I got here as quickly as I could. And I'm very happy to be here today to celebrate the life of a great New Mexican a great Franciscan priest, Fray Angélico Chávez. He was born, as was mentioned, 100 years ago today in Wagon Mound, New Mexico. He was a writer, a prolific writer, a painter, of course, an historian, and historian not only of the church, but of the history of New Mexico. And he wrote the genealogy of the Spanish colonial period, drawing upon the archives of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, and he used the rich information found in baptismal books and marriage records and death records of the cathedral parish here in the city, as well as other historic parishes of New Mexico, bringing life from those bland statistics and being able to fashion from his writing a rich history of so many aspects of New Mexico. And of course, that genealogy of the Spanish colonial period is a treasure for many, many families here in New Mexico as they look at their roots and find out how it is that they happen to be born in New Mexico, and to find out more and more about their own traditions and their own history. It was Fray Angélico that made that possible through his wonderful work. And of course, at that time, he was the archivist for the Archdiocese, and that gave him the opportunity to put into readable, usable form many of the documents that are so important to not only the church, but also the history of the state of New Mexico. And he wrote a history of the image of Mary, La Conquistadora, the image of Mary that is in our Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi, having been brought here in 1625 by the Franciscan friars. And so Fray Angélico wrote a wonderful history of that image and the importance of that image for the people of Santa Fe. As a priest, Fray Angélico served in a number of different assignments here in the Archdiocese, perhaps the most significant being Peña Blanca, Our Lady of Guadalupe in Peña Blanca. And of course, he served at the cathedral and in other assignments. But somehow in his rich life was able to find time to be a military chaplain in the Second World War, and was in fact present for the landing, the World War II beach landings in Guam and in other areas of that sphere. He had such a fruitful and productive life that it is totally correct for us to honor him today. I came, as was mentioned by Fran, in 1993, and Fray Angélico was living at the cathedral in the rectory next to the cathedral with the Franciscan community, and I got to have a chance to visit with him and spend some time with him, have a little lunch with him, and in fact some iced tea with him. Of course, the iced tea was a little stronger than most iced tea, and he indeed would have to say that he was a fascinating and charming individual. So we call his memory back to all of us today and thank God for him. Let us bow our heads in prayer for a moment and pray for the blessings to this group today. Let us pray. Loving God, we praise and thank you today as we honor your priest and talented son, Fray Angélico Chávez. We're grateful for his priestly work and for his writing skills that benefited the people of New Mexico for many years. And we ask you to bless our speakers that come today to share about his life, to bless all who participate in this symposium in his memory. Let us enjoy this day with happy hearts, and we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Enjoy the symposium, everybody.
Thank you very much. Is it on? Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. I was very fortunate to have Jimmy Santiago Baca to write this poem for us, of which you should have all received a handout from the letterpress of the Palace of the Governor. And Jimmy Baca was also very nice to agree to read this poem to us today. Let me just introduce him briefly. Jimmy Santiago Baca was born in New Mexico. He's of Indian Mexican descent, was raised by his grandmother in orphanages and in the New Mexico state prison system, from which he emerged as a writer. And not only a writer, but as a very important 20th century Chicano writer. Jimmy Baca received his BA in English from UNM. He received in 2003 an honorary PhD from the University of New Mexico. He's published poetry, short stories in many publications. He has 3 novels under his belt as well. And the themes of all these publications deal with barrios, southwestern barrios, injustice, community, family, love, and so on. So I really want to welcome Jimmy Baca to read the poem to us that, again, you should have a copy of. Thank you very much.
Well, this looks like a wonderful gathering, and thank you for inviting me. This morning I woke up, it's my son's birthday. He's 7 years old, Isai. So he said I better get my butt back there really quick, because we have a big party at the park. It's interesting because on this particular poem here, I read all of the books by Senor Chavez, and I read all the biographies written about him, and I still couldn't get a reading on him. So, thank you very much. So I waited till, I have one of these risk personalities. So I waited till the very last day when Tomas emailed me and Thomas emailed me and said, we're getting worried. And I didn't want to respond back that I was really worried too, that I couldn't write it. But I looked out and I saw the sunlight that morning, and I saw how it was equally distributed on everything in the yard. These big pine trees, small little red berry trees, the lawn, the flowers. And I realized that when you have a person of this magnitude that has an impact on the culture this deep and this wide, it's similar to the sunlight. Because the sunlight really doesn't choose what it's going to nourish that particular morning. It just does so without any sort of bias. And I kind of like that. I kind of liken that to Senor Chavez. And then, so I wrote it, and it worked out. Again, this morning I got up, and I told my son I had to leave. My other 4 kids were still sleeping. But I told my son I had to go, and it was his birthday, and he was up pretty early, and he says, he kept me long enough to read some of the books on Senor Chavez and who he was and stuff. He wanted to see who was sharing his birthday with him. He wanted to check this guy out, make sure it wasn't a gangster, make sure it wasn't a debt collector, make sure it wasn't the tax man, stuff like that. And so I read it to him. I said, I got to go. I have to go. So I left, and I just walked in 2 minutes ago. So this whole Chavez enterprise that I got invited to participate in seems to have taken place at last minutes in my life. So here's the poem. Fray Angélico Chávez. It's hard to describe your look. If you were the sunlight this morning, you spread your loving look into my window. Spread over my room your infinite glow, a radiance that creates hope. and we receive your blessings. Because it's so hard to describe your face, I compare your eyes to piñones, your high cheekbones to its branches, your buoyant spirit to its exuberant green needles. And I say in temperament, you resemble the sun. You are here in the grass, on the adobe wall, in the pages of my poetry book. You glow redemption. Open-hearted love for the land, warming the air with your vehement passion to announce to all life how beautiful our Hispanic cultura is, how God and angels have anointed us with the gift of humility, giving of ourselves with embracing gusto. Every day, even the dark and the light bring about a faith that keeps our familia intact and loved and cared for and deeply, deeply connected to La Virgen. And you knew the power of our Sacred Lady. That was why you pursued your path so diligently to make known to the world her love for us. Muchísimas gracias, Fray Angélico Chávez. Gracias. I want to thank you very much. I'm off to Albuquerque to a birthday party. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was really good. I would like to introduce now Fabian Chavez. Mr. Chavez spent all his life, dedicated his life to public service, and, hold on, my microphone. Is it better now? Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Would like to introduce Fabian Chavez. Mr. Chavez dedicated his entire life to public service in New Mexico and or for New Mexicans. He was state representative, state senator, director of tourism, Department of Tourism, director of economic development, superintendent, insurance department, and assistant secretary of commerce under Jimmy Carter. Most of all, however, he was also the brother of Fray Angélico. And he will speak to us a little bit about living with Fray Angélico and growing up with Angélico, I assume. If you would like to know a little bit more about the life of Fabian Chavez and good and bad politics in New Mexico, there is a 2008 publication by David Roybal biography on Fabian Chavez. Thank you very much, Fabian.
I brought some props that I didn't anticipate bringing. Incidentally, I'm not promoting the publication of my biography, but brought it only as evidence of something that's sort of historic in our family and in the state. The University of New Mexico Press has never published the biography of two brothers from the same family, except now. Angélico is one, I'm the other. I wish he were alive because I'd love to show him mine. You see, I had some connections with Fray Angélico that my other brothers and sisters did not. And the first one was that I was born on August 31st, 1924, the week that he was leaving for the seminary to become a priest in Cincinnati. And it occurred to him, as I popped out into the world, that Dad and Mom had had three other sons, and nobody had thought of naming somebody for Dad. Usually the tradition in Spanish families, if you have a son, the oldest one gets named after the father. But they'd already had three of them. The first one was Manuel Ezequiel, that's Fray Angélico. The second one was Romualdo Eugenio, known as Cuate here in Santa Fe. The third one was Francisco Eugenio, who just died about 2 months ago. And then I came into this world, and Angélico says, we'll name him Fabian, and that's how I got my name, Fabian Jr. Not knowing that later on, of the 10 in the family, and I will talk about that a little later on, I became, I guess you would call me in my youth, the rascal. And what a rascal. It's all in that bio, incidentally. It makes interesting reading because I came through that route to where I am today. Unlike my other members of the family, I've had a hard time trying to figure out what I'd talk about. After all, I'm representing the Chavez family. I was chosen really because of the 10 members of our family, only 4 of us are left. The oldest one left is Sister Consuelo, Maria Consuelo, who lives in the state of Michigan. She's 89 years old and couldn't come here. And of all the boys, even though I was the third youngest when I was born, now towards the end, I am the third oldest of those remaining. 14 years different than Fray Angélico. And so here I am pushing 86 years in age. And I know, I have quite clear in my mind that Angélico would not acquiesce or have allowed us to have this meeting today. I had a personal experience with him on this, and that's I'd meet him for breakfast from time to time at the plaza or at the bar and grill instead in the park. And on this particular morning occasion, I had written a paper that he had written and instructed Stuart Udall that he wanted nothing to do with having a library or a building named after him. He was a Franciscan, didn't believe in that kind of stuff. So during the breakfast, I said, Manuel, on a personal basis, we addressed him in the family by his baptismal name. Mira, Manuel, I told him in Spanish and English to get my message over clearly. I said, why don't you just let them do it because they're going to do it after you die? And he said, well, then I don't give a damn. So I am sure that if we'd have told him that we were going to hold this symposium, he would say no. But then I would have instructed him again that we're going to hold it anyway. So he is dead. He wouldn't give a damn, and so here we are. Now, when you're chosen to represent the Fabian Chavez, Nicolás Arroibal clan, I can only speak really about myself and my personal relationship with Father Angélico, which did not develop to the last 25 years of his life. And I'll explain that later. But in that period of time that we start spending more intimate time with each other and talking, besides New Mexico history and all sorts of aspects of New Mexico history, we talked about family members, and a lot of them know what I'm going to say about what he thought about them. And it was all very full of what you would call familial love. He was very complimentary in his own way. And I'll start with what he thought of the oldest one, which was our sister Martha, who was only 11 months younger than Fray Angélico. Poor mother. Anyway, and they grew up together. In the biography, or this book published, you'll see a picture of both of them taking First Holy Communion together, all dressed up so pretty. I looked real closely, and I got a magnifying glass to see a picture of the face on my sister Martha, because he described her as the rest of us have always described our oldest sister, Martha, as a llorona, crybaby. but it's meant in a loving way because you see, she, with any of her brothers or sisters, her mom and dad, if we were going somewhere, she'd cry. And when we came back, she'd cry. And she had this, Angélico described, these cryable eyes that exude pity and love at the same time. And that was our sister Martha. That's the way he described it. And then the next one is the twins. The twins are not identical. Oh my God, they're not identical. Not only is one a boy and another one's a girl, what a difference in lifetime and style. The boy was 20 minutes older, so I'll speak of him first. While Angélico thought about him, Angélico thought that our brother Romaldo, known as Cuate, which is a colloquialism for twin or pal. You can use it either way. Most people knew him as pal and judge, Cuate Chavez. He said that he would have been a big hit as the standing comedian, or more than that, a performing comedian, because my brother Fray Angélico described him naturally funny, like Cantinflas. Yeah. And for you Anglos, Charlie Chaplin. And Cuate had a way of doing that routine. And Angélico had seen him perform, and he says, too bad, because he would have made zillions of dollars. He was just a natural comedian. Nora, his twin sister, on the other hand, was an intellectual, loved music, or was involved in the original establishment of a community music group here in Santa Fe back in the 30s. Angélico remembered that and said that he was such a talented lady, had become a county school superintendent, amongst other things. But I think of all the family, he got to be closest to Nora than the rest of us because she typed out on an old typewriter most of his manuscripts. He'd write them longhand, and Nora would type them in so they could take them to publishers. And then in the last 18 years of our folks' lives, Nora lived with them at 712 Osequia Madre, and Angélico moved with Nora and would see her all the time. And I'm sure he had conversations with her that she never had with anybody else. Quite frankly, I didn't get to know him until, you see, even though I was 14 years younger, he's gone to the seminary and was gone to seminary to study with priests for nearly 14 years. And he was ordained in 1937. And then 4 years later, I've gone into the Army. And then he follows through. And World War II comes in, then goes off. And then we all get back together again. And Angélico's so involved in writing, in painting, and his duties as a missionary priest, a Franciscan, which he was so proud of Peña Blanca, and going to mission church, and his responsibilities to Cochiti, Pueblo, Santo Domingo, San Felipe, which are the closest, and others. And I tried to get acquainted with him, but I was very reluctant. Even towards the last, there was a degree of love, respect, and fear that involves me in my relationship with him. And I got a feeling the rest of my brothers and sisters sort of felt the same way. Now, the next one that he described was our sister Adela. He described her like being a top sergeant. She was the type of person who was very disciplinary with the younger kids. For example, don't you dare walk in the house with those dirty shoes. And but she'd gone during the war to work at Fort Bliss, married a guy from there by the name of Alfonso Montoya, and they went on to California, to Los Angeles. And she became close to Angélico because Angélico used to go to Los Angeles a lot to go to Huntington Library to do a lot of research. And he had a freebie. He would stay with Adela and Chito, so they got to spend a lot of close times together. and he thought the very world of her. Then after Adela, I have to remember who's next. Yeah, Maria Consuelo. Maria Consuelo is the only one of the girls still alive, the one I said in Detroit, 89 years old, unable to be here today. His connection to her was that he was so proud that she was a Navy nurse, and he used to brag about a family where all the boys served this country, all 6 of them, plus one of the girls, the daughter, Consuelo, as a Navy nurse. And Angelico was assigned to the service. He happened to be in Hawaii and married Consuelo to Norbert Gorski, a nice Catholic Polish boy, naturally from the Detroit area. And she ended up, and they moved to Detroit. It's been there in Michigan ever since. His observation of Consuelo was he was so proud of her being a Navy nurse, and in a way disappointed because she had 7 beautiful children, but their names are all Gorski. At which point he injects a complimentary remark of our brother Antonio, who had 2 sons, and our brother, kid brother, the baby brother, who had 4. And then pointed out to me, unlike you, Fabian, they produced kids that will carry on the Chavez name. I said to myself, thank you, Father. But I just said it to myself. And so we go on to the next one after Consuelo, Francisco Eugenio. He was a specialty, because you see, Francisco Eugenio also went to seminary, the same one. He wanted to be a Franciscan priest, and he went to Cincinnati and was there, and he was there about 6 years. World War II comes around. He realizes that 4 of his brothers are already in the service, and he feels that he has to go in the service too. So he asked the provincial for permission, with all intentions of going back to the seminary after the war was over. Well, he did not go back, but it left a great influence on him. I can only guess what kind of conversation, because Angelico, believe it or not, I had this experience with him. I noticed that my brother Francisco Eugenio remained very super close to the church. Every parish he belonged to, he became a member of the choir. And he recalled a lot of the training that he got as a seminarian. And he must have had quite a few conversations with my brother, because on one occasion, Manuel and I are having breakfast on a Sunday, about 11 o'clock after the 10 o'clock Mass at the Cathedral, at the Bar and Grill. And they fixed it so he could have a scotch even before noon by getting a cup of coffee, putting scotch in it, and mixing it with a little water. And he was breaking the law, and so was the bartender. But anyway, on that occasion, Francisco Eugenio was going to join us, but he was a little late. As he came in and started walking towards where we were sitting, my brother Fray Angélico turned around and he said, "Here comes a frustrated priest." I didn't ask why he said that, but I could guess why. I think that deep inside, and I think my other brothers and sisters noticed that about Eugenio, that he had this attachment to the church and everything the church did. He was 4th degree Knight to Columbus. He was anything that had to do with the church, he was involved with it. And so he thought of my brother Eugenio in some ways in a holy way. Then I'm in the picture, but I'll talk about myself in a minute and what he might have thought about me. And then, of course, there's Antonio, the one that produced 2 more boys to continue the Chavez. He was very, very proud of Antonio, because Antonio decided to go to college and thought he was going to be a school teacher. And he did come to Santa Fe, got his master's degree. and was teaching in the Santa Fe County school system and decided he wanted to become a lawyer. And I asked him why. He says because he wanted to do something besides teaching. He was getting ready to screw the heads off all the students. He was a little impatient with them. And so he and his wife, and having children already, Tom was born, moved to Los Angeles to go to Loyola University, because there it was not semesterized. You could go to law school at night and weekdays and and Saturdays, so he could get his law degree. He succeeded in getting his law degree, and he was practicing law, and he was appointed Superior Court judge in Los Angeles. And Fray Angélico went there to be with his brother when he was taking the oath of office as a Superior Court judge in California. And then, so he thought very highly of what Antonio had accomplished, and very proud of the fact that he had a beautiful family, including 2 boys that could carry the Chavez name. And one of those boys is going to speak after me, little Tom. Eugenio's whole name was Antonio Esteban Chavez. And then there's the baby in the family. I use the term baby in the family because just about a week or 10 days after the occasion of Father Angélico's funeral services at the cathedral, I was having lunch with some friends of mine, and they brought up that fact that they knew and respected Father Angélico, and asked me if he was the oldest in the Chavez family. I said he was. And he said, then they asked me, are you the youngest? I said, no. They're 2 younger than me. And I said, well, then who's the baby of the family? I said, his name is Jose Alfredo Camilo. His 3 names. And I said, the baby just turned Medicare age. And he was super proud of him. He reminded me on several occasions, Jose, about you having those 4 wonderful boys that have done so well and are carrying the Chavez name on. Well, the Lord just planned it that way. Since I wouldn't have but 1 daughter, he said, well, we'll just put the load on the youngest and let him carry the Chavez name. So I have a wonderful family. And there's a funny thing there, because it's published, but most haven't read it. Angélico had quite a sense of humor. And he'd inject it once in a while. And Bernice, who's Jose's beautiful wife, wonderful guide, because she runs the place, Angélico married them, and then Angélico served in World War II, and then during the Korean War. During the Korean period, that's when our kid brother Jose served the nation, and they happened to be in Fort Bliss at the same time. Angélico in his uniform, a major, quite clear that he was a chaplain because they have a cross on each side of the lapel, and a lot of people got to know him as a priest and a chaplain. And on this occasion, his sister-in-law, Jose's wife Bernice, was with him, and he ran into some friends. And they said, Father, how are you? He said, I'm fine. Yakety, yakety, yak. Oh, by the way, I want to introduce you to Mrs. Chavez. You can imagine how their eyeballs just popped out. And he let it sink in for a while, then brought out the fact that it was his sister-in-law. Now, what did he think of Fabian Jr.? I didn't get to know him till the last 20 or 25 years of our lives together, and it all happened, and it started. I was quite active in public life. I was a state senator at that particular time, and I was visiting and having lunch with dinner with him one time, and he showed me a transcript of something that he wanted to publish, and he was quite intense about it. It was a biography of Padre Martinez of Taos. And he wanted to make sure that he could publish, and he had in mind a trilogy also of Father Gallegos of Santa Fe and Monsignor of Albuquerque, and Monsignor Ortiz of Santa Fe. They were all in that era during the Lamy coming to become the first bishop, and the conflict that developed between the Frenchman and our local priest and the people. He was quite intense about it. He frankly felt that a lot of people had written lies about Padre Martinez, not the whole truth, and what a great man he really had been. And also the same was happening with Padre Gallegos, and also conflicts with Monsignor Ortiz, who was a vicar general when Lamy came to Santa Fe. And what happened there, when I got into the picture, is he told me to read the transcript. He had it with him because he had submitted it to the University of New Mexico to be printed and had been turned down. I read the transcript, and I came back to him and I said that I thought that it wasn't that it had been turned down because he was so critical in some ways of Archbishop Lamy, but especially his vicar general, his right-hand assistant, Monsignor Marchebouf. And he referred to them as those Frenchmen. So he wanted to know if I could help him some way to get that published. And then I happened to know that he was driving a car that had been loaned to him by one of the successful car dealers in the history of New Mexico, and especially he became the top Toyota seller in New Mexico. His name was Julian Garcia from Albuquerque, and I've known Julian for years and years because his dad had been a very prominent Democrat, Democratic Party, and I was a Democrat, and a liberal Democrat, and I'm proud of it. Anyway, he had loaned him that car, and he told him, just drive it forever if you want to. So that was a contribution. And so I went to Julian, and I said, Julian, I says, let's find a way to raise some money so we can get that book published. And Julian says, I'll underwrite it. And I brought a copy of it for two reasons. Because the way Angélico said thanks was to dedicate it to Julian Garcia and Fabian Chavez, Jr., lovers of New Mexico, Hispanic history, and in their own distinctive ways, current makers of it. And the book was Time and Chance, the history. From there on, he and I became pretty close friends, but not that close. The close was how we could get future stuff published or something done. I also did something for him that he would not have approved at all, and that is I was going to set up a way of placing a statue of his here in because they had named the library after him. And I got that idea because unlike other famous writers and artists of Santa Fe, they have some walk-on plaques in the plaza in front of the art museum. And he had made the remark, well, they ought to be ashamed of themselves. If they thought so much of those people, why did they put them so everybody else would walk over them? So I knew how I felt about that. So I talked to a friend of mine by the name of Harry Bigby about a way to raise money to get a statue. And again, here's the lover. He had every one of Angélico's books. He says, we'll find out how it costs, and I'll get it done. So it was commissioned by Harry Bigby, and we have the statue there. Just a couple other incidents. I hope I'm going to take too much time. But you asked me to talk about the Chavez family and what I knew about their relationship with Angélico. He found out that I was pretty good at having connections because of my activity in public life. And So one day, he called me and he says, "Hey, big shot, I got a deal for you." He says, "I'm working on the renovation of the little church, Golden, and I want you to get me a bell from one of those fire engines that the Santa Fe Railroad had for all its trains, because they were developed in such a way that they would have a ring that goes a long distance so that you could hear the choo-choo train coming in." And he says, "I want one of those bells to put on the church Golden." And I found out that they're quite a collection item and they're very hard to get. So, old Big Shot says, "Oh, now what do I do?" And it so happens that through my political connection again, there was a very prominent lawyer by the name of Brian Johnson in Albuquerque, one of the fantastic lawyers. And he was the attorney of record for the Santa Fe Railroad for the state of New Mexico. And I had known him since right after the war, because Brian Johnson one time was the treasurer of the New Mexico Democratic Party. So I told him that I wanted him to get a bell, if he could, to give to Father Angélico. He also had a collection of Father Angélico's books. I found out how many admirers Father Angélico had. And he says, "I will do it on one condition. I can't guarantee it, but I'm going to do my best, providing that any other publication that Angélico makes, get me a copy autographed to me that I can put in my collection." So that was our deal. And sure enough, he went all the way to Chicago to the main headquarters for Santa Fe Railroad and got the bell. And so my relationship with him then went into private and intimate stuff that I won't talk about, nor would I publish, because it got to where he did want to talk to me on a brother-to-brother basis, and no more older brother to younger brother. And one of the thrills of my life was one time when he told me, "I got something to tell you, Junior." My oldest brothers and sisters would slip into the junior thing from time to time. "You know, I was at a cocktail party last night, and I was introduced to some people, and they said, 'Are you related to Senator Fabian Chavez?'" And I said to myself, "I've made it." Because all my life, it had been the other way around. "Are you related to Fray Angélico?" And that was our relationship. He loved our family dearly. We loved each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chavez. Thank you.
I thought I turned it up.
No, I didn't. Is it okay up there? Okay. Next, I would like to introduce Nasario Garcia. Dr. Garcia has been and still is a very good friend of the museum and also a very good friend and supporter of the library. Dr. Garcia was born in Bernalillo, grew up in the Rio Puerto Valley, southeast of Chaco Canyon, and he received his degrees from the University of New Mexico, and BA and an MA in Spanish and Portuguese, and he spent a year at the University of Granada before he received his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh in Spanish literature. Dr. Garcia lectured internationally in South America, Central America, North America. He also lectured locally, and his latest, when he lectured in Spain, he made the point to me that he always will link New Mexico to Spain, and makes that point when he's lecturing in Spain. Dr. Garcia published 22 books. His latest is Fe, y Tragedias, Faith and Tragedies in Hispanic Villages of New Mexico. It's about norteños in Hispanic villages. This book was just released last week, so you should be able to get it in the bookstore. But more importantly for us here and for this event, he also edited Fray Angélico Chávez's Cantares, Canticles and Poems of Youth. An emeritus professor of Spanish Languages and Literature, Dr. Garcia currently lives here in Santa Fe. Dr. Garcia, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tomas. I'm honored to be here this morning to participate in this symposium, to honor a man of letters whose name is etched indelibly in the annals of history and literature. I would like to dedicate my presentation this morning to Fabian, Tom's father, Tony, and the rest of the Chavez family. Let us begin. Lo en la iglesia estaba el padre Angélico de Santa Fe, pero esto era en Peña Blanca. Ay, cuando se ordenó, yo era monecía. Él hablaba tan bonito, hablaba tocante a todo. Pues era un padre franciscano y uno de los mejores padres que sé yo, porque cuando hablaba de la misa o del sermón que daba, te quedabas con la boca abierta. Sentías mucho su cuerpo y su corazón, su alma. Sentía yo gusto. Desde chiquito yo le agarré mucho respeto. Lo era muy artista. Ahí en Peña Blanca hizo todas las estaciones con la pura gente. Ibas tú a Peña Blanca y vías la estación de la Cruz. La gente toda lo respetaba mucho, lo quería mucho. Pues estaba él joven cuando estuve yo de monecía. Las misas se me hace que las daba en latín entonces, pero siempre el sermón, todo lo daba en español. These are the words of a gentleman by the name of Eustaquio Salas, whom I interviewed 10 years ago in Bernalillo, New Mexico, for a project that I'm working on the town of my birthplace. What do these words, coming from a man who was an altar boy and now in his 80s, tell us about Fray Angélico? He is described as an orator, gifted with words and versatile in the religious subjects he covered. Hence, you were left to reflect, to ponder. But more importantly, his sermones, or evangelios as we call them in New Mexico, penetrated your body, your soul, your heart. Fray Angélico's sermons engendered pleasure in people, and above all else, he earned his parishioners' unqualified respect. But was Fray Angélico a seemingly serious person, or did he have a sense of humor? I think we already know. I asked my informant, sense of humor, he asked. I was just a little boy, but people claim he was ornery, but could be funny from time to time. And who should know better than Tom Chavez, my friend and Fray Angélico's nephew, here with us today. A few years ago, before Fray Angélico passed away, Tom proposed to his uncle that the History Museum here be dedicated in his honor for all of the accomplishments to New Mexico as a scholar and a writer. His uncle was swift and to the point. "You will do no such thing while I'm alive." Tom's response, who can also be quite fast on the draw with his own words, said, "Then I'll do it after you die." Fray Angélico responded, "After I die, I don't give a hoot." Actually, he used another 4-letter word. Fray Angélico a stuffed shirt? Hardly. His early writings underscore his sense of humor, especially the stories of the Southwest and those dealing with love, courage, and faith, featured in Ellen McCracken's Uncollected Stories of Fray Angélico Chávez. The words love, courage, and faith on the surface appear to be serious and therefore defy any implication of humor. However, as we shall see during the next few minutes, humor was an integral part of Fray Angélico's persona. Humor comes in a variety of ways, from play on words, double meaning, tongue-in-cheek, to language conflict or miscommunication. The Real Academia Española defines chiste as an example, a joke, as una historieta muy breve que contiene un juego verbal o conceptual capaz de mover de risa. That is, a brief anecdote that contains a verbal or conceptual game capable of engendering laughter. Fray Angélico's humor, in general terms, is no different. Being in New Mexico, he sometimes mixed 2, if not 3, distinct worlds, namely the Hispanic, the Anglo, and the Native American, to drive certain points of laughter across to the reader. The key ingredient in humor, going back to the Real Academia's dictionary, is the word game. Laughter is a game of entertainment, and folklore is, to an extent, served as a backdrop to Fray Angélico's world of humor in his writings. He claimed not to put much stock in folklore. In 1993, 3 years before he passed away, he wrote a letter to me because we were in communications for a book that I was doing on Hispanic writers of New Mexico. And he said, quote, "Sorry, I was never interested in folklore." In fairness to Fray Angélico, I must say, at least parenthetically, at that time he was suffering from a brain tumor. So I think, and it's only conjecture, that he was either pulling my leg or he had forgotten. Okay? Because no one born in New Mexico, the land of enchantment, including Fray Angélico, is immune to the magic of our state. He was smitten, just like countless other writers. A lot of his prose is indeed imbued with folklore. Along the way, he talks about the evil eye, el mal ojo, how to ward off witches using osha, or the cursed guitar because anyone who played it died. In his story, Sierra Moon, written in 1930, when he was 20 years old, the narrator sets the stage for the drama that is about to unfold. The narrator says, "We had just finished our supper on the mountain, encouraged by a good mouthful of a dry, fragrant, resinous pinon branches. The campfire lost all thoughts of death and began to lick the cool night air with voracious red tongues amid the hungry crackling of the wood." As the altitude of the Sierras made the air cooler every moment, we four crowded around the flames. Fernando the cowboy, young city-bred Flicker, myself, and Buffalo Bill. Buffalo Bill was Flicker's dog. As the eerie night descends upon the campers, the subject of ghost and death is brought up by Flicker. Fernando the cowboy, whose weather-beaten and parched face is no stranger to the desert, proceeds to tell the story of Isidro and Ramona. Flicker, the city slicker, was petrified in his shoes and looked at, but he didn't admit it. As he listened to Fernando as he wove the story, and the drama intensified. She was all right early in the morning when we came up for wood, sobbed old man Isidro. There was real grief in the old man's actions, and I pitied him much more than I did the dead, said Fernando. He continued the sad story. We stood there for a long time, boys. Boys, it was something sad to see a poor, lonely little old man as Isidro sob as he did. He was alone now, for Ramona had been his sole companion for many years, and I doubt whether he shed as many tears for his wife many years ago. Flicker, the city slicker, a bit slow to grasp the subtlety of language or the situation, was distraught at the harsh and inhumane treatment Isidro inflicted on poor Ramona, making her carry heavy loads of wood to the point of having her legs almost buckle under. Slavery, he proclaimed, while Fernando deduced that Flicker inauspiciously had fallen victim to Ramona's true identification. And who was Ramona? Ramona was none other than Isidro's sidekick, his donkey. But what about Fray Angélico's? What Fray Angélico does is to humanize a donkey, the beast of burden, and in the process dupes Flicker, the city slicker, into thinking that Ramona is a woman. Fray Angélico's mischievous nature, mentioned at the onset of this presentation, comes to light. Then there is Tim McKay in a story titled The Dude of Anchor Ranch. McKay is dismissed by the medical doctor at West Point because he is diagnosed with tuberculosis. The good father at the academy, Father Donovan, suggests to McKay that he head west to New Mexico to be cured. McKay, like thousands of so-called lungers in the 1920s and 1930s, comes to New Mexico to rough it as a cowboy. However, he is leery of becoming bow-legged. Time lapses in McCain's good fortune and hard work on a ranch pays off. He is cured from TB. One evening, as McKay looked beyond the horizon, New Mexico's landscape conjured up an array of beautiful images. The desert was a crimson carpet dotted with purple spots, the sky an enchanting jade, the clouds a rolling surf of opalescence. As he, McKay, filled his sentimental soul with all this ravishing beauty, the gaze, according to Fray Angélico, fell on the road immediately before him, and his eyes opened wide in good humor astonishment. The setting sun behind him was throwing his shadow in sharp relief on the white gravel highway. There it is. There it was. Was it his own shadow? The shape of the sombrero that he wore, of his big shoulders, and of a pair of legs that had formed a veritable elongated circle? A few days later, McKay, wrote to Father Donovan back at West Point with a P.S. inscribed in capital letters. As to bow legs, Father, you were right. The Timothy episode is Fray Angélico's ironic illustration of how newcomers to New Mexico, not just tuberculars, are apt to change, not just in temperament, but also in how they are able to look at themselves with an open mind and a modicum of humor. A story with a different humorous slant is titled Carrie's Notion, in which Elmer Walgemeister, an aspiring writer who keeps getting rejection slips from publishers. And how many of us know that? Elmer is involved with Carrie, the keeper of a local candy store. Basil Panaoitis, the Greek who owns the candy store, resents Elmer's friendly overtures towards Carrie. The rivalry between them exacerbates. Does she acquiesce to her boss's amorous advances to keep her job? Or does she side with a penniless Elmer? Needless to say, she finds herself between a rock and a hard spot. One day, Elmer, at the local priest's behest, enters a literary contest, hoping to win some money to marry Carrie. Basil the Greek, thinking that Elmer has made wedding arrangements to marry Carrie, decides to visit the priest to confirm his suspicion. Basil, a brute of a specimen, and armed with semi-literate language, whose pronunciation and dissonance jarred the syllables and vowels of the English language, confronts the priest. Panoites, my name, Basil Panoites. I go to Greek church sometime when I worship. What I want to tell you, Mr. Priest, is that you keep out of my affairs, or maybe I blow your rectory to pieces. The priest, unfazed, responded in refined and seemingly pedantic English, the antithesis of Basil's jargon. You will do me very much a favor if you blow up this place. There's heavy insurance on it, and I could build a new rectory, but please warn it to go out before you light the fuse. So good afternoon, sir, and good day. Elmer Walgemeister enters the literary contest, but before doing so, Carrie suggests that he consider using a pen name and something that Fray Angélico used, okay? And in fact, one of the funny pen names that Fray Angélico uses, for me anyway, he uses Angelico, A-N-N-E, and then Jellico, Jellico. Elmer's short story wins the contest, but his troubles with Basil Panoites do not abate because the story takes place, you probably guessed it, in Basil's candy shop. And the main character is none other than Basil. Look here, fellas, says Panoites to his friends. I have been insulted. He spells salted, S-A-L-T-E-D. I have been insulted in the press, P-R-A-S-S. It just came out. Look, some wise guy, he writes something funny about me and my place. What is it, Basil? Asked a fellow they called Eli, who at the same time had his copy of the magazine with the story. Take a look, Basil replied. Some son of a gun. He write a story about a candy shop. and he called my sugar bowl the fudge den. Oh, you mean the fudge den? Another repeated with a grimace. If I know who writes this, I killed the booger. I sue him for libel. When he meant libel. Carey, who acted as a kind of a conspirator in the literary contest, helped Helmer win the contest and $2,000. He, in turn, proposed a marriage to Carey, both of whom presumably lived in perpetual wedded bliss. The last story I want to discuss with you is called Time and Tide. Time and Tide is a narrative to be discussed, I beg your pardon, was written in 1935. The story concerns two old spinsters, both of them twin sisters named Fructuosa and Sinforosa, who run and own a hotel in Mora, New Mexico, where Fray Angélico spent part of his youth. While the name Fructuosa and Sinforosa are not exactly tongue twisters for most of us, but in the eyes or in the mouths of the local boarding school boys in Mora, they were difficult. Hence, they dubbed Fructuosa and Sinforosa Time and Tide. As Fray Angélico says, and this is where he shows part of his corny humor, he says, as the old proverb goes, time and tide wait for no man. These happy nicknames fitted the old maids to a pair of tees. And if you want to stretch the metaphor, go ahead. I'm sure that Fray Angélico, in his mischievous nature, had something else in mind. And if you are like that city slicker, and you don't know what I'm talking about, see me after that. Over the years, Time and Tide made a fortune. In the picture enters a fellow by the name of Spud Chisholm, who works dynamiting sites to build highways. At a given moment of reflection, he conjures up a marriage scheme with one of the sisters to inherit their wealth. But old-fashioned as they were, one of the sisters, Time, kept their life savings hidden in one of her stockings underneath the old petticoat. And some of you may recall, certainly my grandmother always kept her meager life savings inside her pajamas. And nobody ever knew that except me. And right outside, she had OSHA to make sure that some witch didn't come along and try to steal it. One day, while snooping around the hotel kitchen, Spud Chisholm spots Time and sees where she kept her money. All at that point, the idea of marriage yields to robbery. It's a classic case of a butched-up holdup, thanks to Spud Chisholm, who had moments of both brilliance as well as stupidity. He knew that Time and Tide were not weak sisters. In fact, for Spud Chisholm, the names Time and Tide, when pronounced rapidly, sounded more like TNT because of his dynamite brain, if you will, or dynamite ear, and his pyrotechnic brain. Don't forget, he works for the highway department. No offense to you, to those of you who work for the highway department. Since Time physical attraction was not an inducement to Spud Chisholm's potential wealth, not to mention that he was no Ruta Valentino or Casanova. In fact, Fray Angélico says, Frankenstein's face makes a hit on the screen, while Spud's mug would rather be behind the screen. Therefore, Spud's clever idea, since the sisters were thick as blood, was to wean time away from tide because, as he thought, if you want the canary to sing, don't court the yellow bird. Just feed him bird seed. What this bird seed is to a canary, flattery is to an elderly maid. Easier said than done. But given his less than flattering looks, Spud Chisholm needed someone to play the role of Romeo in pursuit of Juliet. And who better than Dan Murphy? Not quick on his feet, but dashingly handsome. He would be the cat's paw, so that the pieces to the story of the cat and the canary began to fall into place. He applied his background in engineering and mathematics and came up with a plan that suited Spud Chisholm. Besides, Dan Murphy could use some extra income himself. Romeo Dan coerces Juliet time into marriage, and she, like a canary, gorged herself with birdseed. On elopement night, he drives the highway commissioner's car headed for a gravel pit out of town. Suddenly, a figure appeared ominously and spontaneously in the middle of the road, whereupon Romeo and Juliet stops the car and shut the motor so that time could hear better. Hands up and keep him up, hollered Spud Chisholm, whereupon Juliet Time fainted right on the spot. Easy work now, huh, Spud, with time out? Said Romeo Dan, a corny reference to Fructosa, who had just passed out. Time out, may I? Chisholm bellowed after running his hands up and down her legs and stockings. What's the matter, man? Ain't you got the cash? Asked Dan. You darn fool. This ain't time. It's tide. My presentation here this morning is but a glimpse of Fray Angélico's humor. You will find it in his prose. You will find it in his poetry. Nevertheless, several observations come to mind. First of all, Fray Angélico is, to be sure, witty, though at times corny. Other times he is scornful and mocking, if not sardonic, in his portrayal of characters, but entertaining just the same. He tends to invoke humor at the expense of men's ambitions, ineptitude, and short-sightedness. Men frequently come across as buffoons or bullies. They knowingly or unknowingly determine their own fate. Women, on the other hand, are depicted as astute and oftentimes cunning, to upstage or undercut their male rivals. In the main, however, women are viewed as trustworthy, strong, and benevolent. Even a Carmelite nun acts as a go-between, a cupid, between a young man and a young lady. Was Fray Angélico as a church person unusual? Not at all. All you have to do is read Spanish literature, particularly works written by clergymen during the Middle Ages. Humor is an integral part of that environment. I recall to this day a group of priests from La Cartuja, the local monastery in Granada, Spain, who were friends of the lady where my wife and I lived in the Arabic section of the city. From time to time, they came to visit. One hot summer day, as Father Marcelo and I strolled in the beautiful gardens, I asked him, and incidentally, he was a shy one in the group. I asked him how they could stand the heat in Granada in the summer with those cassocks. Eso es lo de menos, he said. piece of cake. Tengo aire acondicionado. I have air conditioning. At which point he lifted his cassock. He was wearing no underwear. I won't ask those of you. Though I didn't know Fray Angélico personally, I suspect, based on what we know about him and his humor, that when it came to mischief, he could have blended in very nicely with the Carthusian priest in Granada. He dicho. I have concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm not sure how much of an introduction Tom Chavez requires. Tom Chavez is the former director of the Palace of the Governors and the National Hispanic Cultural Center. Tom Chavez has a PhD from the University of New Mexico in history, just like myself. And he was a Fulbright scholar to Spain. And he also is the nephew of Fray Angélico. Tom published several books. The ones I read and I like is Spain and the Independence of the United States in 2004, and also New Mexico, Past and Future in 2006. Plenty of articles as well, but most importantly for the event today, he co-authored with Fray Angélico his last book, and this is difficult for Germans to say, Wake for the Fat Vicar. I think that was Father Juan Felipe Ortiz, Archbishop Lamy, and the New Mexican Catholic Church in the middle of the 19th century. Tom will talk today, Fray Angélico, Uncle Pio, and passing the baton. And I want to thank Tom for hiring me 10, 11 years ago.
The influence of a person is amazing. I hired Tomas, and here he is doing this. And I want to thank Tomas for putting this together, and I really do. This is the first birthday of Angélico's that I've actually celebrated for him. I don't recall having birthday parties for him. Maybe the brothers and sisters did, but I was never invited. Thanks a lot. Also, I want to do you a favor. Why don't you all stand up and stretch? Okay. You're doing this on my time now. Come on. There are a lot of Angélico's family here. Fabian just walked out on me. But Uncle Joe's here. Joe, stand up so everybody can see and acknowledge you. And Aunt Bernice, there she is. And I see two of the carrying the family name, Fabian Jr. He's not really, but we have to call him that because there's 3 Fabians in the family, right there. Fabiancito is carrying on Angélico's tradition, I understand. He just finished painting on the plaza, the green thing, so he's an artist of his own right. And sitting next to him is his sister, Mary, one of my favorites. I also know Consuelo is here, his niece, Nora's daughter. Consuelo. Who am I missing? Oh, and his first cousin who carried something on a pillow at his ordination and almost messed up his ordination, and with hindsight, maybe did. I'm trying to think of what it was you messed up, Monica.
My veil was too tight, but Angélico accused me of something else.
Oh, okay. Her veil was too tight. She was just a little girl then, but Monica Sasaya, and a niece of his, and first cousin once removed to me. But, you know, that's why we have family reunions. Now, Anime King. Yeah. Anybody else from the family? I can't see up there. Oh, yeah, okay. Then there's my own daughter. So don't feel left out, Anime. I forgot my daughter. And my daughter's named after Angélico's mother, Nicolasa. And I'm happy to say she's carrying on a tradition, too, because her first book has been accepted by UNM Press. And what's really interesting, if I can see through the lights, at least one of her children is here, Noe Antonio. That would make him the great-great-nephew of Fray Angélico. Anybody else? This is why we have family reunions, you know. I'm not going to talk about not dating and stuff. Okay. I just drove up to Colorado and back, rushed down yesterday evening and this morning to get here for this. And so I, in the last couple of days, drove through Wagon Mound, where that was the beginning of all this. Fray Angélico was born there. His parents were married there. They started there. And Nicolasa had two sisters, where Anime comes from. And somebody someday is going to have to do some research on those three sisters, because the descendants of those sisters, all in their own rights, it's just amazing. We're just talking about one sister's branch, really, but they all kind of stayed together. Witness Monica messing up the ordination. Also being my babysitter when I was a baby, and she still says I'm full of it. So it just struck me that these two people, a carpenter and a kind of a humble woman who taught piano, and a very small woman, in a place like Wagon Mound, that's something like Fray Angélico and all his cousins and everything else could just evolve from that place. It's just amazing to me when you think about that. I'm humbled even to be part of the family. No, I'm not Angélico reincarnate, nor am I even close, as Fran led on, to being anything like him or achieving anything like him in any way. But everybody I introduced here can do what I'm about to do, relate stories and memories of your encounters with him. And so I'm the context because I was invited, and somehow here I am, you know. And it's not funny. She's laughing at me, you know. So just a brief history of myself. You heard that my mom and dad moved to California so my dad could go to law school, and he became a judge out there. So I was born in Las Vegas, in room 205 in the Plaza Hotel was the first home for me, where my mom and dad lived, him tending bar. And then, so we moved out to California when I was 4, and I grew up over there, went to the California State University system there. My first degree is an AA degree. I'm very proud of that because I have a good friend in Albuquerque who's 85 years old and just got her AA degree. And so if she worked that hard at that age to get an AA degree, I'm putting the AA degree after the PhD now. It's more important. And then while I was out there growing up, Fray Angélico, as you've heard, would come out to California. Then after the Army, I learned enough to come back to New Mexico, which I'd been coming for summers and spending it mostly with Uncle Joe and Aunt Bernice, where I learned everything I know. And So I moved back I brought my young family and moved back to New Mexico and went to graduate school in New Mexico, and then got a job here in Santa Fe, and as you heard, became director of the Palace of the Governors, where we started raising money and doing all kinds of weird things, and getting in trouble, alienating governors, and especially the current one. That's made Fabian the most. That's the best thing I've ever done. He's so proud of me over this. That the current governor doesn't like me. He just, that away, son. And frankly, Fray Angélico didn't have good words about this governor either, did he? No. Okay. So that's the background that I'm going to take you through, and I want to start off with an interesting, different way of looking at things. What I did is I've inherited all the books that Fray Angélico sent to my parents as he published them, as he did with all his brothers and sisters. Every time he published a book, he would inscribe it and send it to them. Here's a new book. It's a practice I have tried to follow myself. Only I'm not sure my brothers and sisters are reading them. It's kind of embarrassing. Mommy does, though. And so here's a series of inscriptions over the years, and you can see how it evolves. And, I'm not even part of this to begin with. And then in the end, you can see kind of like there's a passing of something here. I've gone through some kind of ritual in this great man's mind where now I'm something different. The first early ones here's examples of are to Tony and Marilyn, that's my mom and dad, and all the kids from Uncle FAC. Okay? For Brother Antonio and family. For Tony and Marilyn and all the Chavez Ravine from brother and uncle. Because, we're in Los Angeles, Chavez Ravine, where Dodger Stadium is, right? Actually, the parking lot's where Chavez Ravine was. For Brother Antonio, his Marilyn con cariño. And then in 1972, in the Oroz Codex, after the death of his parents, which I would argue in any biography, outside of a literary biography, was a major point in his life. He dearly, dearly loved his parents. And it affected some of the things he did in a big way, as I see it. So after the death of his parents, he sent the Oroz Codex to Brother Antonio Esteban and Marilyn, this permanent monument to dear mother and dad. And on the same book, he inscribed to me much later, to Dr. Tomas E. Chavez, this is my hardest earned book. So we're starting to get insights from this stuff. After I moved back to New Mexico and entered graduate school and then started to work at the museum, he started inscribing and sending books to me. For Tomas, spelled without the H, and my name's Thomas, and we'll get to that in a second. But people like to call me Tomas, but that's the librarian who owns the library here. That is funny, huh? You and I are going on the road. For Tomas, and he put the accent on the A, incidentally, son of Antonio Esteban, see page 323, and Jenny, my wife at the time, and Nicolasa, too, with the love of old Uncle Fray Angélico Chávez. This is inscribed in Origins of New Mexico Families. I'm not in that book. My dad is, and all my aunts and uncles are. But he did that and said, see, 323, and then he made a note to legitimize me in the family. So the book has to go to an archive so everybody will remember that I'm part of the family. Then come a series of books and inscriptions to Tom Chavez, his penitential uncle. To Thomas E. Chavez, best wishes on his career. I'm just beginning. To nephew Tom, my best wishes for a grand history career. And then in the distinctive clan book of the Chavez family in 1989, to my nephew Thomas E. Chavez, big shit at the Museum of New Mexico. From an aged uncle, Fray Angélico Chávez. And then finally to Celia, my wife, and Tom, with love. Now, that's kind of, now, let's superimpose that over now. I'm going to go back to the early time and in my life with him and bring it up again while all these books inscriptions were coming to the family. He, like you just heard with Fabian, he's the reason for my dad's name. He sent a letter from Ohio to his mother, knowing that she was going to have another child, and apparently knew it was a boy, or maybe right after he was born, and said, "Isn't it ironic that your eldest son's going to be a Franciscan, and we don't have anybody in the family named for San Antonio?" So he's Antonio. And that's how that happened. After my dad returned from the service, met my mother in Las Vegas after a especially bad boxing match at the carnival, my parents were married in 1947 by Fray Angélico Chávez. My dad tells the story of coming back from the Marine Corps in the South Pacific and going to confession and realizing it was Angélico and cutting the confession short. He baptized me, and he suggested, always suggesting names, this guy, he suggested that I be named Thomas Stephen instead of Thomas Esteban, so that I would be T.S., not for Elliot, but here it comes again, tough shit. So no, he didn't have any humor. To myself and my brothers and sisters in California, where we would meet him as young tykes when he came out and for his various forays and stay with Aunt Adela and Uncle Chito. He wouldn't stay with us because of all the kids, of course. We'd drive him nuts. We drove ourselves nuts. But he also had some friends at Santa Monica where he stayed with, too. And research at the Huntington Library. My mom was so impressed with that, which impressed me. Wow, he's a scholar. He's at the Huntington Library. They don't let anybody in there, I snuck in once, and so that was very impressive. He became Uncle Pio to my family. I learned after I moved back to New Mexico he was Coco to the rest of my cousins. I think that's like sort of in reference to their fear of him that Fabian was alluding to, because he could strike hearts in the terror of anyone just by looking at you if you did something wrong, and so he could do that. I never did see a bird land on his shoulder. In the summer of 1960, I was 12 and my brother 11. We were sent out here to spend the summer with the family and become New Mexican, I suppose, because we were becoming too much like Californians. I had bushy blonde hairdo and a surfboard. I'm just kidding. But I was sent back here and stayed mostly with Uncle Joe and Aunt Bernice, some time with Uncle Gene up in Los Alamos. And was introduced in the state legislature. Bruce King was the Speaker of the House. Fabian arranged that, so my career had begun. And, I had my connections, but I also got to spend a weekend, my brother and I, out in Cerrillos, where Fray Angélico was stationed at the time. And I always remember that. What a fun place to go to as a child, as a 12-year-old. All these dirt streets in a cowboy-looking town. The old saloon was still there, and the hitching posts are up, and all these crazies live out there. And here's our Uncle Pio has us there. It wasn't. We had no fear of him because he was a priest. Some poor guys in your family, I'm sure some of you are afraid to touch you, even, because you're a priest. Oh my God, he took these two kids out with him. And we lived there at the church with them for a weekend. We watched baseball. We tended the garden. We even played catch. It was really kind of a neat experience. And then he brought us back to the house where my grandma and grandpa were. I've always remembered that weekend as especially an enjoyable experience. Even before I realized that the person that had me there, besides being an uncle, was going to be a very special human being. I didn't know that. I was just 12 years old. Man, I had baseball. It was cool. I hadn't discovered women yet, On one of his trips out to California, now I'm driving, so I'm over 16. I guess then he had to be 18 to drive. No, 16, yeah. So I was driving him around for some reason, and I announced to him for some, crazy. I had this crazy idea. I said, Uncle Pyle, I think I want to be a historian. I thought he would be so proud of that, because now I realized that he was a historian. I was impressed. Now I was reading his books. Didn't understand all of them, but I was reading them. And at that time, and some of people my age and older will understand this. If you knew somebody who wrote a book, that was rare. I mean, that was impressive. And so here we had somebody in the family who was writing not one, but book after book. I mean, it was like getting the Sunday newspaper, Angelico's new book is coming, and it was really impressive. So, I thought I was going to really impress this impressive man now. I now realize I think I want to be a historian. And his answer was short and crisp. Why? God knows what he'd have said if I said, I think I want to be a priest. I got to be an altar boy for him on a special occasion. I actually did it twice, but the one that was special was the 25th anniversary Mass of the marriage of my Aunt Adela and Uncle Chito. And it was an experience. Now, I had spent some time in a Catholic school before it got too expensive as the fifth kid tried to get into school and so forth, and so we transferred to the other. But so, I knew how to be an altar boy, but it wasn't like being an altar boy for Fray Angélico, because he gave orders. He just told you where to be and what to do and when to do it. And so, but no, that's not what you did, And then he threw the towel at me and stuff. So I think it was because it was me doing that. And then I do remember what Fabian alluded to. When my dad took the oath to be judge and they put the robe on him, Fray Angélico was there. By then, of course, I was already in college, so I have vivid memories of that. And he got up, they had invited him to say something. And Fray Angélico, he would get a twinkle in his eye if he was going to be cute, You could, I learned to see this in him. When he didn't have the twinkle, I knew I was in trouble, But he had this little twinkle in his eye, and I think he inherited it from his dad. His dad, I always remember my grandfather having smiling eyes. They seemed to smile all the time. Uncle Gene had those eyes. Fabian has my dad's eyes. He looks like a deer in a headlight. That's why my dad always wears those ugly sunglasses, And he had this twinkle in his eyes, and he got up and said, that he was very proud of his little brother achieving this position. And then he followed that up by saying, now maybe the Pope will get the message and make me a bishop. Then he said, I need to return to New Mexico to help my brother get elected governor. That wasn't a joke. Fabian was running for governor. And, of course, no one believed him. Everybody laughed, right? And then after, my dad had to explain that indeed, Fabian was in the midst of a campaign. And so there we are, He was thinking of you, even in California. I think you need to move the chair. When I moved here and got into graduate school, I started going to the family reunions that Fray Angélico had started under the name of Sons of San Fernando Rey, Fernando III, King of Spain, the defeater of the Moors in Sevilla and so forth, who, if you work the family tree right, there is a Chavez that's a descendant that somehow married into one of his descendants. So we're all, like all New Mexicans, we all claim to be, descendant from Diego de Vargas or somebody. So we're the sons of San Fernando Rey. And every year there was this really vibrant picnic that went on, and it was just great because, I had come back from California. I'm in graduate school, and I get to reconnect with all my aunts and uncles and cousins. And, I just, we don't do that, and it's a shame now. I think we all got married, and so we didn't have to go to the family reunion to see who not to date. I wasn't going to say that joke today. Well, look at Mary. I have good-looking cousins, man. And at those meetings, we had now a number of priests in the family. All these fathers, Chavezes, They all call him Father Chavez. We never knew their other names, you know. And so one Father Chavez or the other. I kind of got to know him, the Father Chavez from Taos or the one from Espanola or down in Bernalillo or someplace. And then Fray Angélico, see, he was separate. And but we'd have Mass said to start the whole thing, and then we'd go have this big picnic, and everybody'd sit around in chairs and talk and kibitz and everything. And then at some point, Fray Angélico would give up and give us a family history or talk about New Mexicans in general and do that. And eventually I was invited, once I got into my career and out of graduate school, I was invited to do that. And Aunt Nora, Consuelo's mom, was the one that held those family things together. I mean, it was Angelico's idea, but Aunt Nora kept it together. She had her card file of all the Chavezes and everything and who was related to what and how and so forth, and got them all together. And so he was very into family in that way. And Tomas better not leave, because there's going to be a connection here in a second about family with Tomas. No, he's not related. While in graduate school, Fray Angélico started working in the archives of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. At that time, the archives had been transferred down to the University of Albuquerque, which no longer exists in Albuquerque. It was a Catholic-run liberal arts college down there. And so he had to work in the archives down there. I got to meet him occasionally while he was down there, and the first excuse to meet with him was because I was in graduate school. I had started taking seminars. I had to write papers because those stupid professors want you to do that. And so one of my first paper, in fact, my very first paper was a history of the church on Golden that I knew that he had fixed up. So I had to go back and do what Golden was called back when, how it was established, and then start doing all the history. And so I interviewed him on the church in Golden. And, you know, he let me take him to a bar. I was old enough, you know, buy his scotch. And he in no way intimidated me or anything else. He encouraged me to interview him. I think he saw maybe there's a chance there could be somebody else in the family that could do history at that point. And so he did that. Then there's this whole thing about whether he called himself a Chicano or not. He never did. He never called himself a Chicano. In fact, no one in the family does that I know of right now. And that's fine. But there is such a thing as that. And if they want to claim him as part of their literary tradition, I'm sure he wouldn't object to that at all. Why not? And in fact, the reason I say that was because while on campus, there was an organization at the University of New Mexico called Mesa Chicana, which was a group of students in literature and modern languages who got together, and they were trying to promote Chicano literature. They wanted to give an award to Fray Angélico. Now, we're talking, you know, early 70s. Right? And so they knew I was in graduate school there. Somebody had told them. And they asked to meet with me, and they asked me if I would approach Fray Angélico about them giving him a little award, acknowledging his books up to that time. And I said, oh, okay. And he graciously accepted. He asked me, who are these people? I said, well, they're students, you know, at the University of New Mexico. And he said, are they graduate students or undergraduates? No, mostly undergraduate. I said, okay. He drove down to Albuquerque and received the award and gave a little talk to them. And they were so happy. So, you know, one of the things that we haven't said that he is, which he really was more than anything, he was an educator. He educated. Everything he did had a point. From the murals at Peña Blanca to his artwork, to his writings, to his puns and jokes, even to the conversations in the restaurants. We'd sit there at lunch with anybody, and he would start talking about something or another. That's not my thing going off unless I'm supposed to stop. Hello? No. Okay. What is this? And so, I don't think he would have any objection to being claimed as something that he didn't call himself. But I'm not so sure he even called himself a scholar in his lifetime. I never heard him refer to himself as that. What we saw in the paper, he never referred to himself as an artist. And we're claiming him as that. We are. I remember him at a family reunion fishing. I also found out that he liked frogs' legs. He picked up that appetite apparently at Peña Blanca. They were rampant with frogs. And so he liked frog legs. And then started coming kind of an acknowledgement to me. I take it as that, him complimenting me. He gave me his Coronado Quarto Centennial series. This is a series of out-of-print books done by the University of New Mexico back in the 50s by the historians of that time. These are the books of the translated documents of Juan de Oñate and Francisco Vázquez de Coronado and Benavides's memorials in that. And these books were his, these translated documents. And he called me to his apartment. Now, he'd retired from the priesthood. He had an apartment. He called me over to it, and he says, Tom, I want to let the devil out the side door. And what do you mean by that? Well, these books were invaluable. You know, at that time, there were people making a living selling books like this, buying and selling, investing in rare books. They're invaluable, but they're more invaluable to a historian. They're not an investment. I still have them, and I'm not going to sell them, so don't try. I'm going to let them out the side door, too. They're going to go to a library someday, or to my daughter. And so he gave me that. Now, what's interesting about those, because we get to the inscriptions again, first of all, he had a nameplate printed and pasted inside of them, which is pretty cool. Yeah, and then I just, in preparation for this, started thumbing through them because I remembered he'd written notes in those books. Another source of information, right? Insight to the mind. And so I brought some samples of that. In Volume 1, on page 131, he does something as small as correcting a translation. Just a one-word translation, whereas the author had whatever it was in Spanish, animal. Angelico puts horse. On page 76, he proposes a whole alternate synopsis of what has happened in this whole page. Like the author's got it all wrong, right? And he marked it with a paper clip. So that was important. On page 77, he gives the first name of a Franciscan priest that the authors didn't know. They left out like blanks there. It was a Fray Victoria, Fray blank Victoria, and he put in there Francisco. And then on page 336, he amplifies the translation that 2 Indian donados traveling with Coronado's friars wore Franciscan robes. That's what the book says. And he puts, no, they wore, quote, partly short tunics, no hood. Volume 2, he even corrects his own correction. He made a comment about Fray Francisco Jimenez of Tlacalco in red ink in the margin. And you can't read it because he scribbles it out in blue ink and writes no over that, correcting himself. He also gave me his large and well-used Velázquez New Pronouncing English-Spanish Dictionary, published in 1902. It has a very tiny written note inside the front cover in Angelico's handwriting, and Ellen knows this more than anybody. His handwriting was minuscule. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I need to say that. I need to stop right now and say this. What a tremendous book Ellen McCracken has written about Fray Angélico. Everybody should applaud her big time. If you want a standard for scholarship, the technique of scholarship and the art of writing, you won't find any better book than that. Yeah, it's true. Thank God you did it. And he has written in very small writing, actually get a magnifying glass out to read it. It says from Fray, or Fra, and then there's something I can't read. Edward Casey, OFM, Christmas, 1930. Now, I know Ellen's already made the connection. I can see from her face. So, there's a whole new book for you. On the back cover, he has 3 quotes. One from Padre Alonso Gonzalez, OFM, and it's written in Spanish. I translate here. Franciscan poverty, by the personal satisfaction of the apostles, and not to simply seek to receive hugs, but to satisfy others. Then from, it looks like Padre Antonio Ginelli, OFM. In English, he has a quote, or Ginelle, could be. Ginelli, it is Ginelli. Okay, good, thank you. Are you doing a book on this? Should I share this with you? He is doing a book. Yeah, okay, all right, man. My books are your books. Yeah. Okay. He puts in English a quote from Ginelli, "Death surprises every true Franciscan while working in harness." Then he has a quote in French, which I didn't translate because I don't know French, from a man that's only the last name Manzoni, which sounds Italian to me. So there you are. Because of him and because of his influence, because he just, opened up the crypt in the cathedral, for example, when I came to the museum, one of the things museums do is start collecting. And in his case, the influence was collecting blue Franciscan robes. He opened the case. The Franciscans wore blue in New Mexico. They were distinct for that. I have all afternoon, Tom. Yeah, but I'm at the podium. He took pieces of those robes and the rope out and gave them to Uncle Joe and Aunt Bernice. They kept them in a shoebox, and they brought them in and donated to the museum. I don't know if they're on exhibit now, but they're here. Invaluable artifacts that, because of Fray Angélico and the family, are here. He was involved in the acquisition of the Segesser paintings. He came to the seminar, or the symposium, met Father Pulzer, a Jesuit scholar. They hugged, just good to hug, and I'm sure they exchanged ideas and stuff. And he wrote his last article, which is yet to be published, out of that symposium, about who the artists were of the Segesser paintings. He identified them. It's going to be published because I'm working on that anthology right now. So he bounced ideas. As I said, then he came to a speech that I gave for Christmas one time at a hotel. His friend, Mr. Greel, brought him. And I was talking about Christmas, and I quoted his poem that he published in New Mexico Magazine about Santa Claus. And at his table, there was all this commotion and noise and everything, And so, Tom interrupted me, I looked at him and says, "Is there a problem?" Like that. This is like Tom. He snapped back at me, He says, "I can't hear a damn thing." Yeah, well, it was all the commotion at the table, of course, but okay. So, speaking under pressure. And then, of course, his legacy continues with the library being named from him. The Friends of the Palace came up with that idea and voted on it. Because he'd researched and used that collection. He came almost daily to the library that predated Tom's library, and they did that. And then Henry Bigby, through Fabian, arranged for the statue, and Donna Questoff, who did the doors on the cathedral, was a favorite on Angélico's. Fabian and Harry Bigby, I guess, decided that she should do it because of that. And I think Donna's here. Right, Donna? Is Donna here? Stand up, Donna. Come on. And he's holding an old book, and the book, and then the citation ends with the final lines of one of his most famous poems, The Single Rose, which is about his relation with God. And my dad suggested that we put a rose in the book, actually, in reference to the poem. And so that happened. So he's here with us. I could go on to all the books at the palace while I was here. We reprinted and updated from Origins of New Mexico Families to The Lady of Toledo, My Penitente Land. And then the most singular honor he could bestow upon me was the day he toddled into my office. I thought I was a dead duck because my office was small and there was only one way out, and he came in it. And he sat down on the desk, and he was serious. There was no twinkle in his eye. And he said, "Tom, I want you to finish my last book." And everybody knows how I feel. In my world, I get to work with a lot of mature people, good people, fine people, and they're all productive. And I says, Angélico, you too, Fabian. Angélico, you can still do it. Just do it slower, because as you get when you read Ellen's book, man, he was producing like that. I mean, you just wonder how he humanly could do it. And he could get frustrated if things didn't happen fast enough. He says, "Just do it slower." And he says, "No, you're not listening to me. I can't get here to here." And he hit my desk with his fingers. He says, okay, what do you want me to do? He says, go to the Archdiocese, get the manuscript. I've already talked to the people over there and finish the book. Well, he died within the year. And he was actually describing what was really going on with him. The tumor was preventing him from getting what he knew here onto paper. He couldn't do it anymore. And he just point blank told me. In the final note, I'll just paraphrase. I just found the other day in my own papers, he sent me a little note on the back of a Historical Society membership form saying, I'll paraphrase, Tom, whatever revenues come from the Wake book, keep them all for yourself. Keep me out of it. To date, I haven't received a penny for that book. So he was clairvoyant along with everything else. And I just want to conclude, I don't think people should get carried away. In middle teens, I recognized and had a discussion with my parents about what is genius, as a kid, I remember asking them even, religious things. I said, you really think, the blood of Christ is there at communion? Explain it to me. I'm a kid, I want to know this. And I said, what is genius? And they said, well, what do you think genius is? I don't know. I think I know what a genius is, but you know what genius is? Well, Einstein's a genius. What do you? And they keep throwing questions. I think Uncle Pio's a genius. I still do. He was a genius. But what is important as we talk about him and now read new information about him and the new works of his coming out that were actually old works that never were published, he wasn't a saint. He's a human being. He was an extraordinary human being. Just the influence of that man bespeaks of his value. Thank you. Now, there's a footnote. This was Angélico's. And I can't remember how it came to me because I'm losing my mind too. It might have come from Uncle Joe and Aunt Bernice, or it could have come from Aunt Nora. You gave it to me, Consuelo? Okay. Yeah. After your mother died? Okay. And actually the photos in the archives came from your mother too. So the family's been given things. This thing has a title on it, specially bound in a slipcase. Ellen hasn't seen it. Scholars love to do that to each other, and its title is Chavez, Origin of the Species. We're a species, Can't argue with that. And what he did is all the documents that were not, I don't know if all of them, but a lot of them that he found in the archives, the old documents pertinent to the Chavez family in New Mexico, he photocopied and then bound in here. And so I am hereby bringing this and giving it to the Fray Angélico Chávez Library.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. I can. Thank you, Tom. This concludes the morning. Some of you do not want to come back in the afternoon. If I could remind you to perhaps fill out the questionnaire for us. If you are not from here, if you would like any recommendations for lunch, you can ask the volunteers or me. Also, if for the afternoon you would like to fill out a card for any questions, come to think of it, we didn't do any this morning. Are there any questions? Did somebody? Why was he called Pio? P-I-O. Pio. Why? Don't start a family feud. Why Pio?
I gave him that name. I would call him Uncle Pio. Mom said she didn't know where I got that from. But one day when he was leaving the house, and I stayed to monitor, and I went out and waved, because I was terrified of him. I went out and waved, bye, Uncle Pio. The car came to a screeching halt. He turned around and he said, my name is Fray Angélico, and I never called him Pio again.
I gave him the name Coco.
Yeah.
He gave him the name Coco.
Yeah, but Grandma would say at the beginning, yeah, but Grandma would say at the beginning,
Question? Then it is 1:30. Thank you very much.